Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome, I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is a first-time novelist. After obtaining a journalism degree in 1980, his career took a turn down the road of information technology. In the IT field, he was still able to enjoy writing, no matter if it was technical documentation, newsletters, or other materials. He lives in the small town of McHenry, Illinois, with his wife, Laurie, and cat, Peaches. They enjoy spending time with 6 kids and 8 grandkids and are very active in their local church. Welcome to Authors Over 50, William R. Douglas.
Thanks, Julia. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today, and it's a blessing to have this opportunity. So thank you for having me on.
William, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, so what took you so long to write your first book?
Right. So, well, as your opening words indicated, I went down the field of information technology after getting a degree in journalism, and then got busy with that, and of course, family and things. But I always had this passion for writing, and I guess it showed in my technical documentation work that I did, and also wrote copy for websites, et cetera. And it always was in the back of my mind that, I really want to sit down and write a novel one day. And several years ago, a storyline started coming together in my head based on several inputs. And finally, in September of 2016, I started typing out the words in the first chapter, and I finished 4 years later in September of 2020 during the pandemic.
Or are you a baseball fan? Because the title of your novel is The Death and Resurrection of Baseball, Echoes from a Distant Past.
Yes, I'm a huge baseball fan. I came of age in the 60s growing up, learned the sport then, played a lot of sandlot ball and loved to watch the game, and especially play the game with my brother and all my buddies in the town that we grew up in. But yeah, just a very, very huge baseball fan.
Well, this book is a real twist because it's not just about baseball in the present day, is it? It's futuristic fiction.
Correct. So the storyline takes place 140 years into the future. And our hero in the book is a 12-year-old boy. And in his time, a second civil war is 100 years in his past. And it was a very horrible thing, and a large loss of life, and also a loss of part of American culture. And one of the cultural things lost in the war was the sport of baseball. And the story premise is that there's no one alive that knows the sport in the first person. And he goes exploring in the woods one day and finds a relic that winds up having a connection back to the sport of baseball. And that sets in motion a series of events where he becomes the conduit in trying to restore the lost sport of baseball back to American culture. In the meantime, baseball, at least in the storyline, winds up also becoming a metaphor for America itself.
Very intriguing, William.
Yes, it's getting great reviews, and I hope your listeners will find it interesting enough to go out and pick up a copy. So there's also a pretty strong undercurrent in the book. The book is primarily about baseball and this young boy trying to bring it back, but the undercurrent of the war in his time is like I say in the past, and that memory of the war and its after effects that they're still feeling has a strong showing in the book, and helps govern how people treat one another and try to interact amongst their fellow Americans and family members, etc. So it's in there. I put that story, that undercurrent in there for a reason, and because I'm very concerned with the future of our country and where we're headed and the trajectory that the country is on right now. And so I put that in there, hopefully give people pause to think about where we're at as a country and how we can maybe hopefully take a step back and hopefully not go down that road.
Well, those are certainly timely topics, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Once you wrote your book, how did you proceed? Did you search for an agent, decide to choose a hybrid, a small press, or did you self-publish?
I self-published, so it's very important to come on really good podcasts like yourselves and get the word out there. And then obviously word of mouth is very important when you're self-published.
Well, tell us a little bit more about your inspiration for the book.
Sure. So several ingredients, primarily, obviously, the love for the sport of baseball. Also, two novels that I read that were very important. One was David Aikman's novel that came out in the 1990s. David Aikman was the former foreign correspondent for the New York Times, and he wrote a book called When the Almond Tree Blossoms. And that was a fiction book about a second civil war in America that's based along cultural lines, liberal versus conservative. Another book I read much later was William Fortune's novel, One Second After, which is also a fiction book about an EMP attack and its devastating effects on America. And also several years ago, I read an article about games that kids used to play before the Civil War of the 1860s and how these games have become extinct and there's no knowledge of them anymore. And they've just been lost to history. So all these things kind of came together and started coalescing in my head about a storyline of, well, what if the sport of baseball were to die? Because one of the things going on, especially at the youth level for baseball, is that baseball is declining in popularity at the youth level. And so that was one of the big what ifs too. And I take that what if baseball were to die, how would it die? And I project that 40 years into the future, where the sport just continues to slowly lose popularity. And then finally this war comes along and becomes the proverbial nail in the coffin for the sport.
Do you think that baseball is losing popularity because of the rise of popularity of soccer?
Well, I think there's several things. First of all, yeah, definitely the rise of soccer, the rise in popularity of video games. But underneath all that really is this decline at the youth level of participation in the sport for those two reasons and then other reasons as well. So what you have happening is that the city leagues or house leagues, whatever you want to call them, the local league in your town, those continue to see declining numbers of participation. And many leagues have just disappeared altogether. And what's replacing it is travel ball. Now, travel ball has a problem in that it cannot accommodate large numbers of players because it's usually one or two teams, and they have a tryout, and most kids are going to get cut except for the top 12 or maybe 15 players. And the other issue is the cost. It costs a great deal of money to sign your child up for travel ball. There's all kinds of uniform expenses and equipment expenses because everybody's, using higher end stuff. And then there's a travel expense, hotels and gas and everything else. And so because that's gaining popularity, the house leagues are shrinking, and some of, like I say, have disappeared altogether. So what you have happening in the long run is you have a smaller pool of young adults or young kids getting acclimated to the sport of baseball. And because you have less kids involved later on when they become adults, uh, they're not becoming adult fans of baseball. If you have a shrinking pool of adult fans of baseball, then that extrapolates later on, into attendance and so on and so forth, and TV viewership, and so, like I said, I take all that together and project that out 40 years, and came up with this what if scenario.
And that's very sad because that's America's sport, I think. And my dad was such a baseball fan. He played in college and he would go to New York to see all those Yankees in the
Sure,
championship games, back in the
sure, yeah,
60s.
yeah, right, right. And you see this decline in also attendance levels at the major league level. And again, obviously at the youth level, you see the decline in the numbers and participation
Yeah.
with the youth. Where I live, we used to have like 3 little leagues that were right here in this area, and we're down to 1. 2 of them just completely folded up. And the one that's left that my son participated in has half the numbers that it used to have back when he was playing. And he's 20 some odd years old now. So you're talking like, 12, 15 years ago. We had 600 kids, and now we have less than 300. So,
Well, William, I love that you use those novels as part of your research. I love when authors read novels to research what they want to do in their own book. How did you
sure.
determine the plot of your book?
Well, the first was this idea of the sport dying, and then the question was, well, how does the sport die? So in doing that research, that's when I found out, all these metrics that are pointing to the decline at the youth level. But then I'm like, well, okay, but what other external force could come to bear that would kill a sport like this? And that's where I landed upon my ongoing concern for the civil strife currently in America, and how, if that were to get worse, that could also add towards the decline and eventual extinction of the sport. So I mixed all that together and came up with this plot line where it's in the future, uh, and this memory of this horrible Second Civil War has a profound impact on how people behave in the future.
Did real people inspire any of your characters?
Yes, friends of mine. There's a little bit of me in some of the characters. A little bit of my son and my brother, who are both avid baseball fans, in there as well. There's this one particular character. His name's Grandpa Moses. He's the maternal uh, grandfather to the central character, whose name's Joe Scott. And Grandpa Moses is kind of a combination of Sam Elliott and Wilford Brimley, and this one character actor who used to be in the John Wayne movies, who was also called Moses. But yeah, for sure. And then there's a scene in the book involving the president of the United States, and he's kind of a mixture of Abraham Lincoln and Ronald Reagan.
I'd say that was a pretty good mixture.
Yeah.
Why don't you read from your book for us so that we can hear your tone and voice?
Sir, I will. I'm going to read the prologue to the book because I think it's very important that readers decide to pick up a copy, that the prologue really helps build the foundation for the story. So here we go. The year is 2166, and it's been over 100 years since the end of the Second American Civil War, which began on April the 12th, 2061. The sport of baseball has been dead for well over a century. There is no living soul that personally remembers the game. Before the Second American Civil War, the game of baseball, at a professional level, had succumbed to financial woes that were further exacerbated by a prolonged labor strike of 3 years. At the amateur level, the explosive growth of soccer and lacrosse at all levels of play, combined with the pressures of other interests in other sports, caused the kids to simply lose interest in baseball, and it was no longer cool to play the game. Baseball's last breath came as an unintended consequence of the Second American Civil War. Internationally, the sport died as well because of the loss of its American sponsors. The United States and the entire world survived this post-war period, but not without extreme cost to lives, culture, and history. It has taken a century for the United States to recover from the 3 devastating blows suffered during the war. The first blow was the loss of 4 major U.S. cities: New York, Chicago, Charlotte, and Atlanta. The destruction of these 4 large metropolitan areas was caused by a battlefield nuclear exchange that led to the single greatest loss of American lives on American soil in one day. The second blow was a massive cyber attack launched half a world away. It used a weaponized computer virus that erased everything on every computer, public and private. Worldwide havoc ensued because of the loss of all data and knowledge. The third and final crippling blow was an EMP attack that plunged the United States and parts of Canada and Mexico into horse and buggy mode. The EMP attack destroyed the nation's electric grid, all electronic devices, all public and private transportation networks, and led to a breakdown in law and order brought on by a supply chain collapse. When the maelstrom had ended, the developed world found itself not better off than a third world country. As a result, the entire world was plunged into a severe and decades-long depression, with the rest of the nations of the world focused on caring for their own. There was no help to be found for a country the size of the United States. Thus, an agonizingly prolonged period of survival mode ensued before Reconstruction could begin. Reconstruction took several decades to return America and the industrialized world to some semblance of their former glory. Now, with the sun rising on the reconstructed United States, McHenry, a town in northern Illinois, is home to an intrepid 12-year-old boy named Joe Scott. Joe has a knack for exploring and sets out one day with a buddy to see what is in the woods east of town, on the other side of the river, which has been labeled a no man's land since the end of the war. While there, Joe discovers a century-old relic that sets him on a quest to learn its meaning. His journey leads to the rebirth of a game long since forgotten by time and the ravages of civil war.
Wow, William, that's very intriguing and very frightening, that premise that you have there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. And again, there's a dual purpose in the story. When the chapter one starts in the book, well, all the war stuff is behind, all the bad stuff's behind. So there's an entertaining story starting from chapter one that follows the exploits of this 12-year-old boy, Joe Scott. And then this undercurrent is there in the story to make the reader take pause and reflect about where we're at as a country right now and what we can do to try and relearn the art of agreeing to disagree and the art of getting along with one another, even when we do disagree. And it's a very important thread in the story.
Well, you haven't had the book out for very long, but what publicity are you working on? You know, we writers don't like to promote ourselves and we'd rather be writing, but have you found any publicity that worked for you or maybe that even didn't work?
Yes, so I've been in the paper. I had a feature story done about the book in our local paper, so that was some good press. Um, Also, I've been on several podcasts, and I have several more booked, and some others expressing interest because of the very unique storyline and its tie into current events and how things are right now, how divisive things are in America. So, word is getting around, and I continue to plug away and in hopes of getting a wider audience interested in the book. So,
What do you think was the best money you've ever spent as a writer?
the professional editor. Yeah, I had a small group of trusted friends that were beta readers, proofreaders, and the one gal in particular, she had a PhD in English, and she was an English teacher. Um, but then I got to a certain point in the editing process where I realized that I had better get a professional editor involved. So I did that, and that was money very well spent, because the end product was at that point ready for publishing.
What does your family think of your new career as a writer?
Well, they like to kid me. They like to give me a little ribbing here and there about a best-selling author, which I'm not. I'm just an author. So best-selling hasn't come yet, but hopefully it will. But yeah, they're happy. We were actually at a family reunion in 2016 when I made the announcement I was going to start writing this book, and so it finally came to fruition. So they're all pretty excited and happy and a little proud that I was able to make this accomplishment actually come to pass, especially being over 50. In fact, I'm over 60. So
Many of us are. I'm interviewing people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s who are
uh-huh.
still writing beautiful work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I do enjoy the craft.
Do you think you have another book in you?
Yes, there is one kicking around. It would be basically going back in time to, try and tackle what would this awful thing look like, the Second American Civil War. And the goal there would be to write a story that would hopefully dissuade anyone from entertaining the thought of trying to have such a conflict on our soil again. So
So it would be a prequel to the book you've written.
loosely, yeah, loosely a prequel. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So that's actively being uh, formulated.
Well, William, as always, our last interview question is always our writers over 50 are a unique set. Do you have any advice for writers 50 and above?
Start. So start. Yeah. If it's something that's been on your heart to do, I mean, you can do two things. I mean, you could keep delaying it and read books about writing and go to seminars about writing and watch YouTube videos about writing. It's not to disrespect any of the people that have put together that kind of material, but I think the best thing to do is just sit down and start putting your story together and put it on paper, on the computer, whatever your medium is that you want to do it, and then gather around you a close knit group of people you trust, preferably people that like to read, and begin to share your story as it develops with them and get their feedback, and don't be afraid to make changes as things move along.
I think that's great advice. And we just appreciate you so much being with us today. We've had a lovely visit from Texas to Illinois. So thank you so much. And we're excited to say you're now one of our authors over 50.
Woohoo! All right.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's D-A-I-L-Y, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.